How's that? Can you feel the air? I'd like to know whether you can feel the air coming to you. You people that are sitting there and watching this picture. Cush, can you feel it? Can you EI? I see. Now, the amplification on this number 5 microphone is, gee whittakers, those lights are awfully bright, EI.
The silent film had difficulty with the spoken word. It had no difficulty with anything else, not even musical numbers. This sequence was directed by Ernst Lubitsch, photographed by John Mescal, produced by Warner Brothers, the studio that would revolutionize the industry just 1 year later and bring the silent era to an end. Pictures were better than ever, but no one thought of them as silent films. They were the movies. And something extraordinary was happening to the movies. They suddenly found they had a rival, radio.
This is station STAR, the voice of Hollywood.
Now the public was obsessed with sound.
In the main studios in Hollywood, California.
Thomas Edison's obsession with sound had produced the phonograph in 1877. One of his earliest attempts to synchronize music to picture. The sound has been lost. By 1895, he had to settle for a peep show with a phonograph, the kinetophone. The Europeans made better progress. Oscar Mester patented his device in 1905. Like his French rivals, he used a gramophone. But his sound was not loud enough to fill a theater. In 1910, Eugene Laust, a former employee of Edison, set up camera and microphone in a back garden in Brixton in South London and recorded sound on film. He took his invention to America, but no one would back him. Edison had returned to the field. The Edison system used the phonograph. All the problems of talking pictures, he announced in 1913, are solved.
I can remember that we talked into a horn, and it was sort of elevated. But my sister, my eldest sister, she made one, and she played a little fairy queen. Here came this little dainty thing, you know, and skirt and everything pretty, and she was supposed to say, "I am the fairy queen," or something. And she came out saying, "I am the fairy queen," which was it was fantastic.
I am the queen of the fairies, and I'm going to cast a spell over the giants. a spell of
The voice sounded odd only when the film was projected at the wrong speed. But that and other technical hitches happened all too often. Repeated failures put showmen off talking pictures for more than a decade. Nickelodeons flourished with ordinary silent films. They all provided music. Some employed the one-man orchestra, parodied by Harry McCoy in this Max Sennett comedy. Max Wayne is the hero on the screen. (1921). The Kellam disc system attracted the attention of the great pioneer director D.W. Griffith. He was always willing to experiment.
When Mr. Griffith was making Dream Street, he introduced sound. It opened here on 43rd Street at the Town Hall.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to say a few words concerning the play of Dream Street, which you are about to see. Dream Street. I wonder if there isn't a dream street running through the heart and soul of every human being in the world.
He soon stopped it because he said it was suicide. Only 5% of the world speak English. Why should I lose 95% of my audience?
But sound had arrived. Western Electric's public address system could fill the largest hall, thanks to Dr. Lee De Forest's invention of the Audion amplifying tube. De Forest combined his amplifier with a device for recording sound on film, and he called the invention phonofilm.
You are now listening to a talking moving picture whose synchronism is not only perfect, but foolproof. It is the invention of Dr. Lee De Forest, the noted scientist who invented the Audion tube, without which we would have neither radio nor transcontinental telephony. He photographed the voice on the same film right beside the picture. And for the voice reproduction, he applied the principles of radio.
De Forest went into sound production, but met resistance from producers, exhibitors, and even players.
We were working in the De Forest studio in New York, a little tiny studio in the middle of the city. And I was told that De Forest was working on a sound something that had something to do with films, so that they would bring sound into films. Well, I didn't see how that could be done. And anyway, I didn't see any sense in doing it. I didn't see anything was wrong with films as they were.
Bessie Love had worked in pictures since she left school. However entertaining the subtitles, engineers were dedicated to replacing them with speech.
Cheese crisp. Cheese crisp.
Theodore Case, just seen here, was developing a system virtually identical to DeForest's.
All right, EI, you can shut the thing off now. Yeah, shut it off. EI, will you please shut the camera off?
Case's sound films reached new heights.
Oh my, he is making eyes up to me. He is up on haste to me. He is almost breaking my heart. I am Satan, mercy let his conscience guide him. He wants to marry me and be my honeybee. Every minute he gets bolder. Now he's leaning on my shoulder. He's kissing me. Oh my! He is making
A joke on film was a threat on radio.
This is station STAR, the voice of Hollywood.
But when radio became popular, the attendance in the theaters dropped off to practically nothing. And the big companies were very worried, terribly worried.
The big companies like Paramount tried to recapture audiences with novelty. They tried Technicolor, Gloria Swanson in Stage Struck. They tried bigger screens, Magnascope. They tried more expensive pictures. They advertised them all on radio. The one thing they did not try was sound. The engineers urged them to do so, but there were no takers. All the studios rejected the idea. All but one, Warner's. Warner Brothers had never been in the same league as the big studios. The four brothers had been in the business since the Nickelodeon days. They were enjoying a new prosperity after a very lean period. Sam Warner was in charge of production, with his young brother Jack.
Jack Warner, I remember very well, but I used to bring him to the studio every day, and it's a gospel fact that he never got off at the front door of the studio. I let him around the back, let him off around the back, because the sheriff was possibly waiting at the front door to either attach the studio or take the car.
Warners were now determined to break the monopoly of the big companies to get their pictures more widely distributed. Sam Warner was fascinated by radio. He employed Western Electric to install and operate a radio station so Warners could advertise on the air. At last, sound engineers had a foothold in a Hollywood studio. They sold Sam Warner the idea of synchronized sound. He sold it to his brothers. Not talking pictures, which showmen distrusted, but music. They recorded sound on disc. Unlike sound on film, disc recording was a tried and trusted process.
Come on, boy.
Warner's joined with Western Electric to form the Vitaphone Corporation and opened a studio in New York to be near the Broadway stars.
This immediately revolutionized the whole ambience of the Warner Brothers studios. They first started with a series of little shorts, Vitaphone shorts.
All right, everybody quiet, please. After the bell. All the time in the tropical clime, where the do that song is going to I fell in love with a tropical dog, a wild blue and fuzzy funny man. All the woman skin, she never did have a bit of love in me more. So I made up my mind that I was in fine, the only girl that I adore.
Warner's poured money into a major silent film, Don Juan. They recorded the New York Philharmonic to provide the sound, and in August 1926 held a gala premiere for Vitaphone. Warner's had used their new system to film Will Hayes. On film, he opened the program.
To the Warner Brothers, to whom is due credit for this, the beginning of a new era in music and motion pictures, I offer my felicitations and my sincerest appreciation.
After Will Hayes, Vitaphone shorts were the top theatrical and musical talent of the day. The New York Philharmonic in Tannhäuser. And from the Metropolitan Opera, Martinelli and Pagliacci. But the main event of the evening was the feature film made in the Vitaphone process, Don Juan. Mary Astor played opposite John Barrymore. This is how Warner saw the future. The sound of a symphony orchestra available everywhere. Even the smallest theater in the land could match the picture palaces in the big cities. But for the Broadway audience, accustomed to large orchestras with their movies, a mere recording was an anticlimax.
I thought sort of an innovation, interesting, very nice. Pretty soon we'll get back to silence, you know. And sort of a gadget, something to play with. Never took it seriously.
I remember Joseph Skink, who was an astute motion picture man, was very skeptical of it and said it will never last. I think Jack Warner thought it would never last, hoping it would because they were so in it that they stood to make fortunes if it did last.
Thanks, boys.
At the premiere, the Vitaphone shorts had been the big success. Warner stepped up production.
We were all impressed into duty. We would work, finish one short, go right into another, right into another. They were trying to live that year out and make as much money as they could and let people drop if they had to. You know, it didn't matter to them much.
The old arc lights made so much noise, Warner's had to develop new high-powered incandescent lights. They were silent, but a good deal hotter.
And this 10K was really a brute. You could light a cigar at 100 yards with that thing concentrated. It would just fry people. They'd work in a scene. These Metropolitan Opera singers would come out to do a Vitaphone short, and they'd open their mouth and the spotlight would zip down into their tonsils.
The other studios were heavily committed to big silent productions. They were hostile to innovation. The leading producers agreed that for 1 year, none would adopt sound unless all did. We have too big an investment in silent pictures. The effect on the overseas market would be disastrous. Studios would have to be entirely rebuilt. Let them develop it if they can, then we'll see about it. But William Fox did not align himself with his colleagues. Instead, he signed a deal with Theodore Case to go for sound. Sound on film, Movietone.
My first experience of making a sound picture was with Fox. They had the Fox News Weekly, and the News Weekly had a sound series. They equipped their theaters with sound, and we made a sound news weekly every week, in which politicians and others would say a few words.
Benito Mussolini, filmed by Movietone in Italy in May 1927.
I am very glad to be able to express my friendly feelings towards the American nation. Friendship with which Italy looks at the millions of citizens who from Alaska to Florida, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, live in the United States, is today deeply rooted in our hearts.
The same month, the first solo flight across the Atlantic. Lindbergh's departure was seen and heard on Movietone. Audiences at the Roxy stood and cheered for 10 minutes. Lindbergh's flight was the outstanding event of the decade for many Americans, and when he returned, they went mad. History was made yet again when movie audiences heard President Coolidge welcome Lindbergh home.
And as President of the United States, I bestow the Distinguished Flying Cross as a symbol of appreciation for what he is and what he has done upon Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh.
Fox's gamble had paid off. His weekly newsreels were sometimes more popular than the features they accompanied. Warner's had by now completed their next Vitaphone production. Remembering the success of the music in the Vitaphone shorts, they adapted a simple story for the vaudeville star Al Jolson. It was a silent film with Vitaphone sequences. The New York premiere attracted crowds which literally fought for tickets. The Warner brothers were not there. Sam Warner had died suddenly the day before. None of the brothers was present at the moment of their triumph.
Blue sky, smiling at me, nothing but blue sky do I see.
It was a shock. Absolute shock to hear this man open his mouth and a song come out of it.
Nothing but little bluebird all day long.
It was one of those once in a lifetime experiences, but you see that happen on the screen. A vision, a shadow can come out, a voice can come out of that shadow.
Blue days, all of them gone. Nothing but blue skies from now on. Mama, darling, if I'm a success in this show, well, we're going to move from here. Oh, yes, we're going to move up in the Bronx. A lot of nice green grass up there, and a whole lot of people you know. There's the Ginsbergs, the Guttenbergs, and the Goldbergs. Oh, a whole lot of birds. I don't know them all.
This is what excited the audience, not just the music. Al Jolson's ad-libbing seemed so spontaneous and intimate, they felt they were eavesdropping.
Listen, I'm going to sing this like I will if I go on the stage, with this show. I'm going to sing it jazzy. Now get this. Blue sky, smiling at me, nothing but little blue skies do I see. Do. Bluebird singing a song, nothing but little bluebird all day long.
like that slapping business. Never saw the sun shining so bright, never saw things going so right. Noticing the days hurrying by, when you're in love, oh, don't they fly? Through days, all of them gone, nothing but
when they were showing The Jazz Singer in the Warner Brothers Theater, you had to wait for hours to get in. Everybody was absolutely paralyzed with excitement. And there was a line the whole way around the block all day long. They started the show at about 9 a.m., I think, and the lines were forming practically at dawn. It's the most incredible sight. And then you went in to see this thing. You couldn't get in for hours, but if you got in, you sat there and you saw this fantastic performance. And then suddenly the big face comes up and he starts yelling this thing, "Mammy, Mammy, the sun shines east, the sun shines west. I know where the sun shines the best."
It's on my mammy I'm talking about. Nobody else's. My little mammy. My heartstrings are tangled around Alabama.
And I went home feeling very sad, really. I thought that it was terrible, this film. And I must say I made my contribution by predicting that the talkies wouldn't last very long.
Mammy! Don't you know me? It's a little baby. I'd walk a million miles for one of your smiles on my mammy. I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm singing a song. Yes, singing a song. Come on, give me all you got now. I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm going along. Yes, going along.
September 1928. 10 months after The Jazz Singer, Warner's and Al Jolson have an even greater hit.
Glory, hallelujah, I just stole the fire skirt. Get ready to call. Just like a Humpty Dumpty, da-da-da, I'm going to fall. And I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm going along, going along. Baby, oh, Molly, with you in my arms, honey, I'm sitting right on top of the world.
Studios realized they could hold out against sound no longer. The old silent stages were torn down and replaced with soundproof structures. Soaring costs brought an end to the old, relaxed atmosphere of Hollywood. Sound imposed a new discipline. As actors watched the landscape change once again, they began to be alarmed. So many schools of dramatic training and voice culture sprang up that they were given a special section in the telephone book. Producers warned that screen actors without stage training would be dropped. Broadway actors would take over.
We were more or less, I would say, panicked. Cooper and Dick Arnold and I, we talked a great deal about this, whether our voices would record or not. We knew that John Gilbert, this great star at MGM, his voice seemed to record rather high. So they finished this sound studio at Paramount, and each day they would take a star in, spend the whole day to find out if he had a voice. Well, Coop and Dick and I are standing out there waiting, and about, one morning they took Harold Lloyd in. And the little boy opens the door, and Harold slips in the door, and they lock the door. That's 9 o'clock in the morning. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the door opens, and the young boy comes out. Harold Lloyd has a voice. and hundreds of people applauding all over the place. The next day, Wally Berry. We waited to see. About 3:30 in the afternoon, the door opened. Wally Berry has a voice.
The demon microphone dictated Hollywood's future. Few stars were directly destroyed by sound, but many established favorites were threatened by the new talkies. Some, like Norma Talmadge, retired at once. Others, like Colleen Moore, survived to retire a few years later.
All the Shakespearean actors and the old actors from the stage rushed to Hollywood and opened voice schools to teach the helpless, poor little movie stars how to talk.
The preacher who speaks the holy words, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," leads his congregation to their knees. But the preacher who says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," does not impress his congregation in quite the same way.
So I went to a very special, very famous lady, and I arrived for my first lesson. Now, I looked rather, I suppose, like a care package. I used to wear little sort of plain little dresses and saddle shoes. Of course, I was young, and I arrived, never any makeup. And so I arrived at her door, and she opened it and looked at it and gave me this look from top to bottom and said, "Are you Colleen Moore?" And I was completely intimidated, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Well, come in." She looked at me with astonishment. She said, "Is it true that they pay you $10,000 a week?" And I said, "No, ma'am." And she seemed relieved. And I said, "They pay me $12,500. Well, it was a lovely feeling. Well, anyway, we sat down, so she began to teach me to talk. And she said, "Now we're going to learn to say mother." So I said, "Mother, mother, 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 mother." I said it for 1 hour. And when I got back to the studio, my darling little friend, one of my 26 bosses, Mr. Finkelstein, who was just my very best friend on the board, and he was waiting, and he says, "Darling, what did they teach you?" And I said, "She taught me to say mother." He said, $100, mother? And I said, "Yes." Went back the next day, and believe it or not, she taught me to say father. So he was waiting for me, and I came back, and he said, "What did you learn today, darling?" And I said, "She taught me to say father." He said, "Oi, oi, oi, $100 mother, $100 father. Before you get a vocabulary, we'll be broke."
The fear was that talking pictures would do away with some of the Europeans who didn't speak proper English. Naturally, many of them felt that they would have to return to their own countries because there would be no chance for them to be employed in English-talking pictures.
MGM delayed Greta Garbo's talkie debut for 2 years. They dared not expose her accent to the microphone and kept her making silence. In 1930, they took the plunge with Anna Christie.
Give me a whiskey. Ginger ale on the side. And don't be stingy, baby.
Well, shall I serve it in a pail?
All that suits me down to the ground.
Garbo talked. Others with foreign accents did not. Paula Negri's contract expired in 1928. She made a new career in Germany. So did Emil Jannings. He went without even taking a voice test. Velma Banky was hampered by her Hungarian accent.
Sit down.
In the first all-talking picture, accents had been the least of the problems.
Now, we've got to cover ourselves up. I've planted the stuff in Eddie's shop.
Yeah?
And the Dicks will be there at 10 o'clock.
Uh-huh.
But they must not find Eddie. Don't you understand?
What you mean?
Take him for a ride.
Oh.
Actors were mesmerized by the microphone. So were the men who operated it. Some were as much in the dark as the actors. Each seemed to favor a different system. They agreed on only one thing. The noise the camera made had to be silenced.
The camera was put in a thing looked like a telephone kiosk. And the cameraman, the director, would have to get in there and shut the door, and there's no air conditioning, and they would lose 5 or 10 pounds during the day. And the silence of the studio was unbearable.
Nobody was talking. There wasn't that help from the director of saying you're doing fine. Now you see him at the window. Now run. Now a little faster. There. Nothing.
And those poor actors with those hot lights beaming on them, and we had to change their clothes about every hour because it was a complete sweat. They really suffered. And of course the camera work suffered because we had to put them in those enormous padded cells. And we put the cameraman inside there, and they shot through very thick glass. We had a cameraman on our set. His name was Ben Reynolds, and he was 5'5" and 5 feet across. And he had this habit of going to sleep for 10 seconds at a time. He was completely asleep and then waking up and says, "Yes, what did you say?" And so when you can imagine what happened to him when we had to push him through that thing. We had to push him in because he was round and then close the door on him. He went to sleep right away. And it took a dozen men to get him out after every shot because he had more air in his lungs than there were in the booth.
Weighed down with unfamiliar techniques and equipment, some filmmakers seem to have forgotten everything they had learned.
Mr. Harry Knight.
Get a load of this. Some blonde. She stopping here? No, I've never seen her before.
Film slowed down. Speech was all important.
One company, not to mention any names, bought a New York stage play, and they put this on, had a stage director do it, and all they did was photograph the stage play, a close-up of this, a long shot of that, close-up of this, and it was the dullest thing. They thought it was going to be great. It was the dullest thing. It was 2 or 3 things like that. The business started to sink down under the weight of sound.
He's going to tackle those Zeppelins.
Jack, you can't. You mustn't.
It's my only chance.
Oh, Jack, you'll kill yourself.
Oh, nothing can harm me now with your love. Joan, kiss me once again before I go. All right, Tom.
No, Tom, no. Oh, Jack, for my sake, please. Jack, don't go.
Stand out of it, Charles.
Oh, no. Tom,
Charles, take it away.
No.
Please, miss.
No, Charles, don't let him go. Jack, you mustn't go. No, you'll get killed. Jack, please don't go, Jack.
Filmmakers were ruled by the man in the monitor room. Sound men were hard to find. Few dared question their competence.
Most of them had been Marconi operators on boats, and they didn't know about dialogue. They knew about SOS, and they were inclined to be bullying. And they said, "Oh, well, when you go through the door, you must be quiet because we won't catch you at the other side of the. We must catch you until you get to the next microphone."
It couldn't possibly be that you came to see me with half an idea of accepting my proposition.
I came because I was lonesome and tired and a little blue.
If we had a set, there was a bouquet on the table, the microphone, and there was only one, would be hidden in a bunch of flowers on the table in a vase or something. And the actors would take turns walking up to the table and speaking their lines across this microphone.
Please reconsider. It's almost ridiculous the way I love you.
Not ridiculous.
All of the sound geniuses decided this was their moment to take over the picture business. It was horrible, to a point of where they would go around using double talk and confusing everyone. They'd say, do you get the wah-wahs and the gimmelouts? And, they'd
create double talk, and everybody said, they must be geniuses.
Who are ye? We are for the hills, and for her service. What seek ye in her service? A mullah passing through our village promised us fighting and much loot in the holy wall.
Now, everybody's at the top of the steps now. Hurry! Guns in position. Release the prisoner.
The first talkies did nothing but talk. The novelty quickly wore off.
For all the violence I have displayed toward my fellow man, Allah, forgive me.
In New York, Douglas Fairbanks visited some filming on a soundstage with his English art director, Lawrence Irving, to see what all the fuss was about.
When we came out, he just brushed it off as much as, well, that's that, and it's really not of much concern to us. And off we went almost immediately to make a $2 million silent picture, quite undeterred.
With other producers, Douglas Fairbanks was convinced that silent films would never entirely disappear. Others were not so sure.
They really didn't know what to do. They just didn't know, because lots of people didn't want to give up silent pictures. I mean, letters poured in saying, we don't want to hear them, we just want to see them, we like them the way they are.
It was a very traumatic time because no one knew if this was a fad, no one knew if it would last. And the theater owners were as upset as we in Hollywood because it would cost millions and millions of dollars to change their theaters to sound. And then suppose after they had done that, the public said, we don't like it. We'd rather sit in the quiet and listen to the 100-piece orchestra playing.
Colleen Moore plays a French girl who is told at a military hospital that her soldier lover, Gary Cooper, is dead. Lilac Time was issued in two versions, silent to be shown with live orchestra and with recorded music and effects. This is an original Movietone track. Voices were used only as an occasional effect. In Four Sons, directed by John Ford, an American soldier of German origin risks his life to find the wounded enemy soldier. he finds the soldier is his brother. Musicians who once accompanied films like this were now no longer needed. A whole industry had disappeared.
It was a great industry at that time, and it just collapsed.
Of 22,000 theater musicians in the United States, half were immediately thrown out of work.
All those wonderful orchestras, all the wonderful men, concert masters, people they had imported from Europe, great orchestras, they just left them stranded.
By 1932, only 4,000 were left.
There were suicides, sadly to say, galore.
Now 60 studio musicians on a single soundtrack provided the music for the whole world. Once the musical and perfect synchronization had arrived, the silent film was finished. This was a new kind of entertainment. It worked. There was no argument, no going back.
How's that feel?
Douglas Fairbanks was completing his silent epic, a sequel to The Three Musketeers. For the first time in his career, he allowed his hero to die, stabbed in the back. It was Douglas Fairbanks's farewell to the medium he loved so much.
Douglas came into my room and said, let's go down and look at one of these sound stages. And the doors of the studio were wide open, rather like an airplane hangar. And Douglas paused. He looked into this darkness and he laid his hand on my arm and he said, Lawrence, the romance of motion picture making ends here.